Skill has always been a polarizing topic in Brawl Stars. In fact, there are thousands of videos, mostly shorts, talking about whether or not a brawler is skill, mid-skill, or straight up no skill. But what do they base their arguments on? Today, we'll be discovering those arguments, and oh boy will the video be controversial. First off, we'll start with the most popular argument used. Simple playstyle, easy to use. Brawlers like Edgar or Kit have a straightforward gameplay. But what do they mean by that? They mean that the point of the brawler and what you should do with the brawler is very simple. Kill, camp, repeat. And their passive supercharge rate encourages a passive playstyle. But what most players fail to realize is that this easiness and straightforwardness makes that brawler very predictable. Let's take Edgar. Either he absolutely counters you and there's nothing you can do about it, or you absolutely counter him and there's nothing you can do about it. There's no in between. This simpleness makes the brawler become considered no skill. And I do agree on this point, because why else would be Edgar available for free the 15th day you play Brawl Stars? And most people pick him other than Griff because of his broken on paper mechanics. Passive healing, a super that makes you jump over any building and gain a temporary speed boost, very fast unload and reload speed. Now tell me that doesn't sound broken on paper. That aside, and on the other hand, I do have to mention that don't act like there's no brain involved in playing brawlers like Edgar or Kit, because you can't just jump into anyone. Yes, I know some of y'all will say, yeah, that's super obvious, but I have to mention that assassins are meant to be played this way in any game mode other than duels and showdown. You wait for the perfect moment to go for the target, kill, and then retreat. So this point is somewhat correct, but not entirely. Second argument, and this is mostly used by marksman mains. If that brawler doesn't require aiming, then no skill. I'm sorry, what? By that logic, all tanks and assassins are no skill. And that's completely wrong. Take tanks for an example. In order to properly play a tank, you need to have the biggest amount of patience in the world, because getting that first super is a pain. And since tanks heavily rely on their super as an approach tool, wasting that super makes you a sitting duck for the next, I don't know, 2 minutes or something like that. Plus, you have to rely on dodging to approach your opponents, which marksmen aren't concerned about. And assassins work the same way. They heavily rely on a gadget or the super to approach their opponents. This is why tanks and assassins require more patience and thought than most people think. And again, most marksman mains completely neglect this point, and not even just marksman mains. Players in general call a brawler no skill just because auto-aiming is better for that brawler, and they fail to notice that some brawlers are built this way. For example, Bull and El Primo or Shelly, etc. These brawlers are better with auto-aiming. Like, are you going to aim with that kind of brawlers? If you're so worried about proving that you're skilled, then go ahead, play a match where you aim with Bull, sure. So this second argument is completely wrong, because the core reason of his existence is to glaze a specific kind of brawlers. Third argument, if that brawler has one easy aspect, then that brawler is no skill overall. I'll give an example. Cordelius's silence gadget, all you do, press the button, and then you silence an opponent. Players take this argument, this tiny aspect, and call Cordelius no skill. Even Piper, one of the most glazed brawlers in terms of skill, it gets called no skill because of the pop gadget, that little pistol one. And the most popular example of this whole thing is Amber. Her main attack suits both the first and this argument. And of course, those little players fail to realize that if you try auto-aiming with Amber when the opponent is at max range, you barely get any damage done. However, if you tell them this, they will revert back to the argument of, yeah, but at mid-range, you always get the shot, so no skill. This proves the person with whom you're arguing barely knows anything about the brawler. This often leads to some polarizing brawlers in terms of skill. For example, Stu. Most of his mains and some other people who don't really know the brawler say he's skill because of the whole dashing and the tricks and things you can do. However, some others call him no skill because they see him as a spamming machine. And all this polarizing stuff just because of one aspect that seems easy. Another wrong argument that doesn't always work. Fourth argument, if the brawler is broken. Now, this one is mostly correct. Taking an example, Clancy. On release, his supercharge rate was merely 5 hits, and once he was at stage 3, he would just team wipe with the click of a yellow button. Yet Rosa on release was not called no skill because such a word didn't even exist back then. And if we're talking about such brawlers, understandable, because those brawlers have a yellow button that makes them either team wipe or do something ridiculously crazy. Or they break the rules of their class. For example, Leon was able to counter any tank just by two-shotting that tank. Lara and Lori countering assassins despite the fact that they're a thrower. Sure, I can understand this. But once you start bringing up some balanced or even weak brawlers like Fang, which are considered noob stompers, you call that broken? Then there is something wrong with you. This kind of people would go around talking about, yeah, I played Fang and I easily won this by spamming the yellow button, so he's no skill. Maybe if you didn't have him at 200 trophies, maybe if you had him at 1,000, you'd understand. This is the issue. Some players take a balanced brawler or mostly a noob stomper and call that broken. Hyperchargers can also be shoved into this argument. For example, Fang, again, or Mortis. Mortis's hypercharge isn't as easy as it seems, because you should use it when the opponents are pretty much close to each other, like a bit aligned. You can't always use that. The thing that makes it broken is the mythic gear, so the raw hypercharge isn't really that broken, but some people will call it no skill because they lost to it. Speaking of lost to it, this brings us to the last argument, and this one is implicit. It's hidden in some other excuse. If that brawler counters the player's main. This is the most hidden form of saying a brawler is no skill. Now, you don't expect someone to directly say it. And that's another reason why marksman mains tend to see assassins as no skill, because they secretly counter their class, but they don't want to admit that. This appears more in Clash Royale, where, for example, decks like Hog 2.6 or Golem Beatdown are called no skill, because mostly the players who say that get beaten up by those decks, so they encode their hatred in the form of a sentence that mostly means, oh, that deck is no skill. Although in Clash Royale this thing is more commonly known, it's more popular, but in Brawl Stars it still seems somewhat hidden. But many people play brawlers that counter, for example, Edgar, yet still call Edgar no skill. Why is that? Because of a subtype of this argument. If the player straight up hates the brawler, whether it be past trauma, the community agreeing on hating the brawler, there are so many examples. Because let's be honest, a lot of people don't hate Edgar because they actually hate him or have past experiences. It's because the community does, and that person does not want to get clowned on, so that person also hates the brawler. That aside, players use the term no skill as an insult, and this kind of argument comes with a 5 IQ paragraph that doesn't mean anything. Based on this criteria, how would you rate these brawlers that I'm showing on screen? Are they skill or no skill? Comment down below, and that's it for the video. See you in the next one.